Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel on governance and executive engagement and executive perspective. Many asset management professionals see executive engagement and governance from the bottom up. Today, we bring you the senior management view with a panel of 4 executives and senior management to share the top management perspective. My name is Suzanne Grieman, and I'm the Principal Asset Management Advisor of Grieman Asset Management Solutions. Co-hosting with me today is Tom Smith, Vice President of the IAM USA chapter. As the discussion progresses, we encourage you to take advantage of this unique opportunity and to ask your questions in the Q&A section. Tom, over to you for the introductions.
All right, let me introduce the panelists by name and title. I think, as we discussed, if I try to read all these impressive bios, we will run out of time before anything else can be said. So our panelists, in order, Keely Dedmon, Commissioner of Public Works in the region of Peel. Dr. Kofi Smith, former President and CEO of the Atlanta Airport and now President of Keystone Consulting, which is his own firm. Jim Athanasiou, and I hope I'm getting that one right, Vice President of Engineering and Technology at the St. Lawrence Seaway. And Keith Cunningham, Assistant Director of Physical Infrastructure at the USGAO. This is a great panel. I'm really looking forward to these points of view. A diverse set of responsibilities reflected here, and one that I think will really be rewarding for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So we're gonna just go straight into it, leading off with our first question. And let's start. Many asset-dependent organizations have boards or councils overseeing their executives. How do you see asset management being supported at each level? Is there a secret to getting the board involved? And we will start with Keely.
Great. Suzanne, thanks for having me here. As always, really a pleasure. I work, I don't know if you guys know what GAO does. We work for Congress. And so it's not exactly a board, but I think we have an analogy here with the congressional committees of jurisdiction. And it's my job to get them involved and keep them interested in asset management. I have to say, the key to that is, 1, is it going to save money? And 2, what's the urgency? As you know, the next election is always around the corner. And so they're always worried about making an impact today. And so if you can't figure out how you can do that now, then you're really not going to resonate. But I found with asset management, you can always do it by showing the incremental benefits and the benefits to the mission.
Excellent. Thank you. Keely, over to you.
Thanks very much, Suzanne, and thanks for having me here today. Similar to Keith's comments, in the region of Peel, we have assets of over $30 billion. We've got a population of 1.5. We are a municipal government, so we're governed by our elected officials, our council. So we look to them to set the vision and the strategic direction for our organization. And in order, the secret, I think, to getting them as a board involved is keeping them informed on a regular basis. And we do that through various council reports and by explaining how asset management programs support their vision and how it supports the strategic plan. So it's really about the alignment for us.
Excellent. Kofi?
Yes, Suzanne, thank you for having me. There's a CapEx and an OpEx that can be really or relatively expensive when we talk about the implementation, the installation, or the sustainability of an asset management program. So it can be from the implementation of an enterprise asset management system or the capital replacements of assets. So from a support standpoint, you really want the board to support you from the authorization of those expenses. The CEO or the executive should be the visionary or the orchestra conductor that keeps all the departments playing in harmony. But when that secret, as Kelly was mentioning, the secret of getting the board supportive coming from someone who reported to a board, it was always imperative to have already garnered their trust and their confidence in your capabilities and your decision making. And if you haven't done that already, then get some wins under your belt before you start asking for major expenditures, and then educate them. As my friend Keith said, educate them on how it will align with their business objectives.
Excellent. Jim.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. I'd start by saying, basically, we're a unique organization in the sense that we've been entrusted to manage the assets of the government, which are the locks and movable bridges. So we have a board that basically is really, at the end of the day, they're there for strategy, governance, and interaction with our making sure our stakeholders are, satisfied. Stakeholders, of course, is the government, but also a lot of communities along the way. As it turns out, when you look at asset management as alone, it does the exact same things. I mean, it sets out a strategy and a governance on how you go about and investing in and managing those assets to deliver the value they have to. We have a little bit of an advantage, I'd say, because as part of a board, we have a subset. Just like you would have an audit committee, you would have a HR committee. We actually have what we call an asset renewal committee, and they are actually responsible to oversee the plans, the asset renewal plans that we have, and how we expense that money and the results of the program. So they also monitor the results of the program. So that gives us a bit of they have a long view on things. They're looking at 5, 10, 15 years. Our agreements with the government are usually long-term. So that really, I know it was, I would say from the governance point of view, that's I would call as close to perfections as you would having a little committee that is responsible. But I mean, the process and the whole system implemented really helps to get exactly what the other speakers, education on the assets and understanding of what they deliver.
Excellent. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up question here on this one? And this is a difficult question, and you don't have to answer it, anybody, if you don't want to. But I recently watched our local water utility desperately needed a base rate increase to fix the infrastructure, and the general manager, who was quite competent, was trotted out by the mayor and the city council to announce to the public they needed to do a base rate increase, and left hanging, just left out to dry. They hid in the weeds, and he resigned. And the base rate didn't get passed. Our water system is suffering, and it was a political failure more than a technical failure. But so what do you make of that? Any advice? How do you keep that from happening in organizations that you might be involved in? And as I say, this isn't an easy question, but so anybody wants to jump in, please do. And Suzanne also.
All right, let's start with Keely.
Sure, I'll jump in on that. I've been in similar positions having to defend a base increase on water budgets in the past, and most of it is a result of the aging infrastructure. I think that one of the keys that I hit on earlier is the education, and you can't start the story with the need or with the ask. You need to demonstrate the need. And asset management in the region of Peel right now is risk-based. And I think demonstrating the need and demonstrating the risk of not making the investments that are required is really important as part of the picture.
Thank you. Keith?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
I couldn't agree more with Keith than I do with Keely. She's exactly right. You have to identify the risks. But here's where the rub is. People want to do their jobs. And so in asset management, you get what you get, you don't get upset. And so like the analogy that I'll draw is with the backlog in federal infrastructure, particularly the buildings. The buildings are over 50 years on average. Most of them need major refits or even just standard maintenance. And Congress believes it's saving money by not doing those projects. If you have a $2 million project that you don't do, they save money. And so, and when you don't do the project, then the asset manager is left to just try to make do. And so often they do. They're a victim of their own success, really. You keep the water running, you keep the building standing, you've done your job, and nothing failed. And so they did, they saved $2 million. So the key here is to be honest, not over exaggerate the problem, but be honest about the problems you're gonna have down the road, the roof failure that's gonna cost 10 times the amount of your repair or whatever. And I mean, you gotta let the chips fall where they may if you don't get it.
Good question.
Hey, Tom, just to follow up, Keely and Keith really talked about the hardware. I like to say of that approach, the software to prevent what happened to that gentleman is to really make sure in this instance, the mayor and the city council were the executive sponsors in this particular instance. And it's very imperative for that individual to make sure that he has their buy-in, their top coverage before stepping out to a podium and actually setting it up where they can come and hopefully speak before him to then introduce him on what's going on. Because I've seen it too many times before. What has happened to him has happened to others when they did not have that, that confirmation that, okay, Mr. Mayor or Mrs. Mayor, you're on my side on this. Mr. and Mrs. Council members, we're gonna walk out together. You all are gonna introduce this and I'm gonna come with the technical aspect of it.
Excellent. Jim, would you like to add to that?
No, I think that, well, listen, I think I always like to make it about process and not about people. So I think in this particular case, you know, it's a good example. It's never, you know, the people that go out there and you know, unfortunately do the talking and are sending, you know, the information that maybe some people don't want to hear. They have to be supported by a robust enough process. And I heard the right words, right? The risk, it's got to be based on risk. So we understand this is not any one of us standing in front of you. This is what the process brings out. And this is where we have to invest. And I think that can go a long way. But I wholeheartedly agree with everything that was said. And, you know, it's a little sad to see someone step out there without, you know, the support they need, especially when this is a big problem, asset management. I think across both nations, we know that. And the short-term thinking has to be replaced with a little bit longer-term thinking.
Well, that just leads directly into a question from the audience. So the audience have put up that McKinsey and others are advocating CEOs should take a longer-term view and consider stakeholders. And in bracket, we have the idea being that millennials buy the brand and not the product. What are your views about which aspects of asset management do or might appeal to folks, and how should we engage them? And I think they are referring to the CEOs when they say it might appeal. So that question again, McKinsey are advocating for CEOs to take a longer term view and consider stakeholders. What are your views about which aspects of asset management might appeal? Well, that would be to stakeholders, and how should we engage them? And let's start with Dr. Smith.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, you know, when as a CEO in the company that I was a part of at Hartsfield-Jackson, world's busiest airport, and my stakeholders went across my board of directors, but then also the city, the municipality, the mayor, her cabinet or his cabinet when I came in, the Department of Aviation, and obviously the passengers, right? So there's a vast array of stakeholders. I think what's important to that question, obviously, and it was even mentioned by Jim, is that we have to start having a longer term view as opposed to a short term view. But the way you do that is by aligning, in the instance of your stakeholders, their business objectives and their motivations, and aligning that with the concepts or the elements of the asset management program. And that can be different depending on what the motivation is or the long-term goal of your organization. But that business alignment is what you really want to focus on. So I'll just give you some examples of what we did. So knowing our board and what was important to them, And when we talk about really aligning asset management programs with the business, is reducing operating costs, extending the useful life of the values of your asset, thereby reducing the CapEx dollars so you can reallocate those somewhere else, enhancing the reliability and performance of your assets. That's better customer experience, better employee experiences within your facilities. Improving the awareness and the response to risk, as Keely mentioned earlier, that's just minimizing costly expenditures and creating fewer disruptions and more rapid recoveries. So that impacts your customer, your client, and that impacts your shareholders, your stakeholders as well. So really looking at what's their motivations, aligning the business objectives with the output that we get from an asset management program. That's how you really get people on board and have a longer term view.
Excellent. Jim?
I think at the end of the day, it's harder to do on publicly traded companies that you know as well as I do. You know, they're marked on quarterly results. But I think the answer is in what was already said. The answer is in that demonstrating the value in investing at the right time. And I use a simple example of why would anyone invest in painting? In our example, I would use a lock gate. Why would anyone invest in painting? Well, they would invest in painting because it costs X amount. And if you don't invest X amount right now, in 3 years now, it's going to be X times 2 because we're going to have structural members that are destroyed. So it's an educational piece, but you know, it's also understanding, and I'm going to throw in courage, right? You got to have the courage to have those right conversations and educate not only your board, but you know, they got to be with you when you're making those decisions, because at the end of the day, you don't want to pass the problem on to, you know, whoever's coming up next.
Excellent. Keely?
Thanks. It's an interesting question around the long-term planning piece, because I think that's exactly what asset management is or should be. The focus is on our long-term sustainability for the assets. So in that sense, it would certainly appeal to that demographic and to the stakeholders. And when we look at our assets, they're really there to provide the service, particularly from a municipal perspective. They're there to provide the service to the residents, to the community. So as part of doing our asset management plans, if we can articulate that service and establish what that level of service and the expectations within that community are, then we can get their buy-in and get their endorsement in the plan that we establish. And then aligned with that plan, if we can develop that long-term financial plan that closes the gap on our backlogs and ensures that there's appropriate investments put in place, then there is that long-term target that we have, that even though we have a changeover in councils or in boards over the years, that's still the backdrop, and there's still that overriding expectation from the community to achieve it.
Excellent. And Keith?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to be the downer on this one. I think in federal government, it's going to be really hard to get federal government to embrace long-term thinking that is really necessary for asset management. The average public buildings commissioner is in office only 3 years. So that's this horizon that they need to be working on. They don't want to be doing something that's going to benefit the fourth commissioner after them. I think one of the ways you can do it, though, is by embracing what they embrace and show how asset management can accomplish the goals that they're looking to do right now. Right now in Congress and in the executive branch, it's about greening the federal buildings and showing that they can be energy efficient. They can minimize their carbon footprint. Well, these are all just different words for asset management, improving the assets. And so to the extent that you can mold your vision to their vision, you're going to have a lot better success. And then you can achieve some long-term goals.
Thank you. Tom?
Okay, should we move on to the next question?
Surely.
Or would you like to? Yeah, just follow up on this one briefly. I did suggest to the IAM once that we should do 100-year awards. We used to be able to do 100-year thinking. We used to be able to write 100-year plans. And I don't think there's any existential reason why we can't think in 50 or 100-year terms. I mean, we have, I have the city of Minneapolis 1909 plan sitting on my desk. It can be done. I'd like to see us think about the 100-year awards, and maybe you'll hear more from me on that. Question for me is a large portion of our audience is at the mid-management level. And the idea of talking with you today is really to help them kind of with that story I just told and question I just asked. But, you know, it's said that battles are fought at the mid-management level. I worked with a company one time where the mantra for change was look up, look down, and look sideways. And for middle managers, they're used to looking up, they're used to looking down, but they're often afraid to look sideways because there's somebody on the side that wants to eat your lunch. So how do you do that as an executive? How do you create harmony at that level? How do you get people to talk together, work together when they're afraid somebody else is going to take their budget? So let's see. Let me start with Jim. I'm going to go backwards on my screen.
Good. Thanks for the question. So I'd start by you know, the word that comes to mind is alignment for me. And I think everyone has to know that, you know, we're working for the same thing. So those are nice words. So in our business, for example, you know, we like to simplify it. You know, we do a lot of things, but they come down to three key things. We process cargo, we manage assets, and we manage talent. And when we work from that, one of the challenges we have, even with that in mind, is that we have you know, regions spread out between Ontario and Montreal, and a couple little locks in between, and you know, the cultures that are on there. And what we've done is we've tried to work our values, our core values around. We have one that is collaboration, and we invest a lot in what does collaboration mean. We actually over and above that, on our performance you know, evaluations and discussions with our folks, we talk about the collaboration and then, you know, and areas we can push further. That's sort of the groundwork. But I think what, you know, at the end of the day, what will make it happen is having, I don't want to call them safety nets, but I want to have a foundational piece, like a good governance framework, and that allows for sort of like the asset management ecosystem framework that induces and allows for people to be able to create the opportunities for them to interact on the subject of asset management, which is which helps. So that would long-winded answer to that point.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the use of the asset management framework there, especially. Keith, you're probably talking about inter agencies here, but what's your thought on this?
Yeah, you know, actually, no. This is a problem in every organization, and we had a huge problem with this even at GAO. I think most middle managers see themselves in silos, and I think management treats them in silos. For this problem, we go to this silo, or this silo, and they never interact. So they see each other as the competitors. This is my favorite question, actually, as the competitors, because if I do better, then I can steal from you, and I can rise above the other middle managers, maybe become an executive one day. So I really feel like it is the job of the executives to not promote that kind of, and it's often just through expedience, that they don't want to build consensus, they don't want to bring in other viewpoints, because it takes time and it can be awkward. So they just go, they like their silos, but at the end of the day, it creates that competitive environment. What we found was if you just meet the people, you don't have to do trust falls and all that, but if you just meet the other middle managers, familiarity does not breed contempt, it breeds empathy. You understand their problems, you understand how their problems affect you, and you really do understand that rising water raises all boats. That's what you guys do at the St. Lawrence Seaway, right? Yeah. So you can't just have part of the water rise, you have to have all the water rise. And we were able to work through that at GAO just by doing that. First of all, as an executive, taking your time, doing the due diligence of giving everybody's viewpoints, and also making sure those people actually know that it's a person, not just a name or a department that they're working with.
Great, thanks so much. Kofi, what do you think?
I'll combine what Keith and Jim has offered up. You really need to already have created a culture of collaboration where all departments and leaders know we win together, we lose together. Now, if that culture has not already been established, then what you need to do, or what we as leaders have to do, is that we have to start focusing on the ties between the departments. And then in either our bi-weekly or our monthly departmental meetings, we need to make sure that we're holding everybody collectively accountable for the outputs of specific departments. So that can go along with literally putting it in their incentive plans, their merit increases, their bonuses, based off of their interdepartmental collaboration. And that's one of the things that I've seen as you start to build a culture. And then once that culture is there, then it really breaks down these walls and these silos that Keith was talking about. But if you haven't already built a culture of collaboration before you start implementing an asset management program, this is some of the, or what I just listed is a way that you can start building that culture by forcing people, having a punitive consequence. If you do not work together, all of your pockets are going to feel it. So like Keith said, all ships rise with the same tide, or they can all get sunk with a tidal wave.
Keely, I like that a lot. Keely?
I love all the analogies. Yeah, so I think that the culture is so important, and to help that culture, having a good governance model in place is very important. At the Region of Peel, it seems to be working well at this point. We have a multi-dimensional governance model, and by having this in place, it ensures that we've got a collaborative and consensus-based system. Within each of the service areas, there's asset management teams that are responsible for ensuring that assets are being managed in keeping with priorities that are defined by that next level up. There's an advisory committee as well. And then the advisory committee reports into the executive leadership team, which is the top level of the organization, the administrative side of the organization that I'm a part of. So managers and frontline staff have the ability to bring items to this committee for discussion, and then directions based on the consensus, and it's aligned with the best interests of the organization and not just one group. And I think on that note, I'd also add that I think it's really important to stay away from having one particular service area or department lead the corporate-wide asset management initiatives as a way to avoid competition as well. I've seen in the past where you have an asset intensive group that leads it enterprise-wide, and that can result in some disparities amongst the group. So you need to make sure that the asset teams within the program truly have a corporate view looking at the greater good.
Thank you very much. Suzanne, you can respond to this question if you like, and then I think it's your turn to ask another question.
Go for it. Well, I'll just go right into my question because I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, and I'm gonna just steal a question on executive sponsorship. So executive sponsors are a key success factor. Imagine that you are the CEO. Well, Dr. Smith at least has been a CEO, but you're about to pick the executive sponsor from your executive body. Describe what you would look for in selecting the next executive sponsor for your asset management program. And you're doing this looking from the shoes of the CEO. Dr. Smith, we're going to start with you.
Yes, I want someone who has demonstrated that they can bring together people from all departments, all divisions, all areas within the company, and that they have a spirit of collaboration. I would want somebody that I already know the company or the majority of the company, a large part of the company already has a huge respect for, and that this individual has proven that they make good decisions and they give great presentations. The presentation part is because when you stand up before people, you are helping to sell and you're helping to influence this train continuing to move forward. So those are really the 3/4 things that I would look for.
Thank you. Keith.
I would choose the same person Kofi did. that, that person sounds great. I think that if you're going for someone to lead this effort, you usually pick the person who knows the most about it, and I think that's sometimes a mistake, because then they seem like the person who's, if your infrastructure is a water system, the person knows most about water systems. Well, people are going to see it as myopic. And in order to get what Kofi is after, which is what we're all after, you need to have someone coming maybe from a different perspective. And they can say, well, improving this system and managing this asset better will also help me develop the one that I know the most about. So I think that's how you build these. The person's going to be mad who doesn't get it. They're all going to be mad. But if you pick the right person, like the one Kofi described, you're going to get somebody who can rebuild that bridge and rebuild that trust and actually have a collaborative environment like we all want.
And
Thank
Suzanne, just a
Yes.
quick piggyback off of Keith. Literally, when
Yes.
we talk about the sponsor that you do not want, I literally say you do not want the one who has a myopic view of their department only. And you do not
Right.
want somebody that is argumentative or combative. That
Yes.
person creates more headaches for you than they do solutions.
Very good. Thank you. Jim.
I can't add much. I think between the two gentlemen, it was well, but I will say, we talked about how important it is to be a communicator. I think it was also very important, someone that brings people together. Understanding the business end to end is very, very important. I think it goes along the lines that the assets deliver a value. So to me, if I were to summarize it in concise words, I would say significant portfolio understanding, delivery, value delivery from assets. Having that understanding is key to be able to be an executive sponsor.
Thank you. Keely.
Yeah, I also want to hire the person that Kofi described earlier. I think that just to clarify, we talked about not wanting the person who's, passionate or strongly supportive of an asset, but I think that having a person who's passionate about asset management is a real benefit. And I think they need to have an executive sponsor. They need to be in a senior enough position that they do have political sway, that they have a good understanding of the organization's vision and strategic plan so that they can ensure that there's alignment there. And I think that they need to be good at managing people or motivating people through complex change, because certainly asset management can also be a change management process, and that there can be a bumpy road in that path.
Thank you.
If I could add one more qualification to
absolutely.
this impossible person, it would be that they speak truth to power.
Yes.
It's easy. A lot of times you want to pick a yes person, somebody who gets things done, somebody who follows orders. But in this one, I think you really need somebody who can tell you the hard facts and the way it is. Because with asset management, you get the budget cut, you can make it last for a little bit, maybe you can keep it going for a little bit, but it's not a long-term solution. And the person you pick has to have that kind of perspective and that ability to tell the hard truth.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And Tom, over to you. I think we've hit all.
Yeah, so one comment on Keith's response. I'm really pleased to see you on the panel. Suzanne asked me to write an article for her newsletter about asset management teams, and I've worked with a lot of different organizations, and I always insist that internal audit be a part of the team. And very often the first person I talk to when they hear the word internal audit, they either run out the door or hide in the closet because that's the last thing they want. But I tell them if you don't start there, you're going to go nowhere. And that truth to power that comes from the internal audit is an important part of the whole thing. So thanks for being on the panel.
Well, gosh, thanks to you, Tom.
Yeah. I'm going to ask about business processes, and I kind of jump from the people side to the process side. We know that processes dominate many organizations. Some can be pretty sloppy, but the processes dominate in many cases. What's the secret to aligning the processes that support asset management with the rest of the organization? And what's the secret when those processes have to change? The utility rate case is a pretty good one because the process was, we're going to rely on revenues from user charges, kilowatt hours or gallons or whatever, to run the utility, and now we can't do that. We've got to go for base rates, and everything changes when you really change that paradigm. So how do you align the processes? How do you change the processes? And since you're on, why don't we start with you?
Keith.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you were up on my screen because your picture.
Everybody's on my screen
when you're talking.
I think at GAO we talk about outputs and outcomes. And outputs are processes. We changed this form, we improved this, the effectiveness of this process. And those don't tend to get people going very often. And so the connection you have to make is the outputs and how they affect the outcomes. And with asset management, if you improve the process elements of asset management, then you can improve cost. If you improve the processes, then you can improve retention of your staff. If you improve the process, then you can improve the productivity of your staff. And if you improve all the process together, then you can implement the kind of asset management project that Build Back Better that we talk about all the time. But it's the processes that are the building blocks to those outcomes. But you have to connect. You can't just talk in outputs. You have to talk about outcomes, or nobody knows what you're talking about.
Kofi, how about you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Keith said it well, because, you know, the other part of this question is what would make the board or executives respect the asset management program, right? And really what we've been talking about is you have to show the board or whichever your governing body is, you have to show them what's in it for them. And once you know what motivates your board, and I'm gonna speak from my vantage point of having to report to a board. Once I knew what was important to my board, I had to tie the asset management program to the objectives and motivations of my board, right? I had to communicate what's in it for them. Even though there's all this other stuff that I wanted to get done for the organization, it really doesn't matter about what I want, because they authorize the spending and the funding. I had to align it to their motivations and to their objectives. And that can be, to Keith's point, it's recognition of performance, it's lower downtime, it's minimizing disruption of operations, it's lower cost year over year, whatever it is. You have to know what that is and then educate them on how the program will accomplish their goals.
Very good. Keely?
Yeah, my thoughts are very much aligned with Coffee's. In Peel, we start out each budget deliberation session with staff engaging council to seek their support in ensuring that we've got a sustainable level of funding so that we can deliver the services that are prescribed within the service levels. And they've previously approved the service levels. So we tell them, if you want to do this, this is what it's going to cost. And I think over time, because this is not new and it's evolved over time, and it takes a long time to build up that story and that understanding, But over time, our council has begun to understand the scope of our assets and the cost to manage them. And as I mentioned before, the risks if we don't. I think that as well, having a strategy to address it as well is helpful, because it can seem daunting when you present an asset management strategy and there's a huge backlog, and how are we ever going to tackle this? So if you're able to put together a reasonable strategy, and it might take 50 years to get to that point, but if you've got a strategy in place that can slowly eat away at that, or slowly take bites out of it, then it gives them a sense of action as well.
Thank you. That's good. Jim?
I guess anything more to add to what has been said, and I think not much other than from the board point of view, the education piece and understanding how the assets will, you want to build financial health, and I'll make the case that let's focus on medium and long term for a second from the board's point of view. And if they understand that the assets will be there for the longer term, and being able to generate that value for future generations is key. But I also want to say that I think it's important we get to the point, and I'm optimistic. I think a lot of organizations are getting there. They're no longer hopefully treating the old maintenance analogy. I say that it's just, I'm burning money for no apparent reason. That's how, the old mentality was, where they're starting to understand that it is generating the value. And if as an organization we are going to get serious about it, then, for example, in our case, we actually go, yes, we have the asset renewal committee as part of the board. They understand that, they authorize it. I want to tie in the comments about output and outcomes, and they're tied to our compensation. They go all the way through to our compensation to ensure that we deliver, all the way from the board thinks it's important, understands why it's important, all the way to the now down to the front lines that understand why they're doing and why they're doing, what are the outcomes that we're expecting from them. So I think that always will help in, get the respect, and I think we are getting the respect.
Well, money always helps. Alignment of how our pockets go always goes a long way. And now we have another question from the audience. It's quite an interesting question. Does asset management constrain a CEO by having explicit objectives and plans, or does it support them by supporting better decisions and giving them a better forward view? Kind of a leading question, but I think it would be an interesting one to answer. And let's start with you, Keely.
Sure. My answer is clear on this one. I think that it supports a CAO. I'm interested to hear my colleagues on the call, their response, but absolutely it supports it, because it's all about evidence-based decision-making. And at the end of the day, it's not about opinions or political. There's certainly the political side that comes into play, but we're able to present the best recommendations based on the evidence that we have and the plans that have been put forward. So absolutely, I think that it supports the CAO. Keith?
Yeah, obviously me too. I think that if you're looking at it as a limitation, then you're not looking at it right. It's just simply a way of viewing your infrastructure as something more than just a building or a road or a fence. It's viewing it across all the elements of the business and the mission that it supports. And that if it fails, then your mission fails. And while it might seem like it's a limitation when they have to make this purchase or that purchase, and that takes a certain percentage of the budget, at the end of the day, the goal is the mission. And if you're not supporting the mission, you're not supporting your job. So yeah, I think it helps.
Thank you. Jim?
Absolutely supports. So I mean, there's no doubt in that. And again, I go back to where we're headed as a craft, asset management. That's where we have to be. I mean, at the end of the day, these are decisions that are made based on what's most important for the company at that moment, and they're like Keely mentioned, based on risks, and so absolutely supports what you would do.
Okay, Kofi?
I agree with my panel. If anybody was to follow me on LinkedIn, especially over my last 10 years as CEO of the Atlanta Airlines Terminal Corporation, you would see that I am a very, very people-oriented CEO. And as Keith was mentioning, we were certified with ISO 55001 back in 2019 and then in 2020 as well. And I did a presentation on this to AME, and one of the things that I mentioned to them, why ISO 55001. Talk about all these different things, and then I told them my main reason for ISO 55001 was that it supplied the safety, the tools, and empowerment that made our people lives better, which made them happier, which increased productivity, which increases shareholder value. So to Keith's point, when you start really thinking holistically in totality of this is not just an air handler unit or RTU, this is not just a building, it's much bigger than that. And from my vantage point, I always came at everything in our organization from the people orientation mindset.
Excellent. That was such a loaded question. I was a little bit disappointed. Nobody said some of those CEOs do need to be constrained. But Tom, over to you. I think if you want to ask the last question before we wrap, because we are headed to that time. So I'll give you that last question, Tom.
Yeah. You're doing the closeout. So the last question really is one that you've been answering all the way along, which is how do you connect asset management to the business? And I think that's the major thing. When asset management fails, it fails because it doesn't connect to the business. I'm sitting on a committee right now trying to write the next version of ISO 55001. It's due for revision, and in the introduction, the top question is, how do we connect asset management, and how do we connect this standard to the business? You folks, I think, have all done this. You've all thought about it, but there's an awful lot of the community that hasn't. So what advice do you give? And let's just start. Keely, can we start with you again?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, we've been talking about this all along because it's really about connecting asset management with good service delivery and explaining how one supports the other and then leveraging best practices for that. I think that talking about the governance piece helps with that, having a committee that brings the businesses together to support each other and create that connectivity across a large organization is helpful. And to a large degree, it's about changing the organization's culture towards how they view asset management and seeing it as a best practice or best approach for the business, and ensuring that it's fully integrated into the practices. I kind of look at it similar to project management. We all know that people are trained in project management, and it's how they look at how they approach their initiatives. In order to ensure that they're completed in a timely, cost-effective manner, that you get a quality product, and putting an asset management lens on each of the businesses also gets you to that similar point. I think there's just one final thing that I'd mention on that. It's difficult to establish that early on, and so setting some clear expectations for the organization, ensuring that it's considered as part of the business practices is a way to ensure it becomes part of everyone's DNA at some utopian point in time.
Thank you. No, I think that's been exactly my experience, that many organizations will say, well, we're going to start this off in the corner in the skunk works, and then we'll bring it in. But I think if you don't have the expectation of connecting it to the business from the very beginning, then you end up with an isolated asset management system, an isolated asset manager, And yeah, it's harder to start it early, but thank you. Kofi, what do you think?
Yeah, we've been, as you mentioned, Tom, we've been saying that all along. I would just encourage everybody, as hard as it sounds, but it is the foundation of educate, educate, educate. You have to educate your board and those stakeholders. If you come to me and you tell me, hey, I got a product that will make your car more efficient, and you leave me there, I'm probably not going to buy your product. But instead, if you tell me, hey, I have a product that will make your car more efficient by increasing its gas mileage, extending its drive time between services, therefore giving you more money in your pocket to allocate towards other resources and other needs, then I'm listening, and most likely I'm going to buy. So I think we have to do a much better job of doing the hard work, because it is, for all of us, we get it, right? And it's so very painful to have to educate those who don't get it. But that's what we have to do in order to get them there. It takes a lot of thought, energy. It's very draining, I know. But when we do it, that's how we start helping them understand what the value is. And everybody's articulated it on this panel. That's when we start getting to some wins.
Thank you. You're connecting with a retired professor on the subject of education, so I really truly appreciate that. Yeah, sometimes it's incredibly rewarding sometimes, and then there are days when you wonder if anybody's listening at all. So, Keith.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all been there. Probably a lot of people in the audience have been there when you start talking about asset management. Immediately the eyes glaze over. You're in a congressional hearing and somebody talks about asset management, and suddenly whatever paper the senator has is very fascinating in front of them.
Yeah. And
so for me, it's about some of the things I hear Keely and Kofi talking about, which is putting a practical application to asset management. When you start to talk about case studies of people who actually implement ISO 55000, what were they doing? What did they change? And what was the outcome of what they did? Now you're starting to put it in practical terms. People can understand the analogy with what they're doing and how it might benefit them too. But if you just talk about, again, it goes back to kind of that process question. ISO 55000 looks very process oriented, and people have trouble connecting that to practical benefits. But if you can make that connection, then it becomes a no-brainer for most people, and they'll buy that product that Kofi described.
And Jim?
The only thing, well, I'll start by telling you how not to do it. Let's not be arrogant about it, because I think some of us more and often not sit down and say, "Are you kidding me? What else can I do to explain this?" But I think the answer, I love what was said. Right, we got to educate. We got to be, accept our role as change agents. We're there to support. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But we see how everyone's coming along. The other thing is, like, I hear, water distribution. I hear, transportation networks. How can someone not want to invest on those basic needs that we're talking about? So it just goes to show you, not so much how come someone does not, it's just what we have to do to bring them along so that they can understand, because they're working. I'm opening my tap and water's coming out. I'm driving on a bridge. Well, you're driving, but the bridge is now at a 1 in 10 chance of having a concrete piece fall underneath and hitting so you got to bring it down to small bite-sized components. I think that's the only thing. And I just want to, sorry, I'm going to not digress, but I'm just going to pinpoint, even within our organization, which we have like this pride and joy, we do asset management. We've been doing it for 20 years, and we're trying to line up to, to the ISO standard. And we did this exercise of seeing where we were, right? It's like the gap, I think it's referred to as a regap model. And I'm telling you, my mouth dropped within my own organization when I'm sitting there doing that, how we had pockets that didn't really connect to the basic things that were so simple. So the importance of the education piece, even when we assume that people have it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I'm gonna take a speed round from everybody. Less than a minute, 30 seconds. One thing that you would like the audience to remember, and then I would like to share a bit of feedback that I just got from the audience. We have, I believe, 5 minutes left, so do a speed round. And let's start with Jim because you're already there. One thing that you want the audience to remember about executive engagement and governance, 30 seconds or less.
Very simple. Don't give up. Stay true to your course and make sure you put processes in that'll support it.
Keely.
What Jim said. I would just add on to that. Having a champion is so important. Make sure you have a good champion who's going to drive it through the organization.
Excellent. Kofi.
Do the hard work, put the energy into educating your stakeholders.
Thank you. Keith.
Find the element that resonates with each one of the decision makers you're trying to convince and show them how asset management will help them achieve those goals.
Excellent. And we have a comment, a feedback from the audience that clearly says, not a question, but a recognition. This panel discussion has been one of the most enjoyable, informative, and entertaining that I've sat in on a long time. Kudos to you all and Suzanne and Tom for excellent moderation. And with that, I would like to say thank you to the illustrious panel for so kindly donating their time. These are very, very busy people that we were able to get here today. And not only did they donate their time, but so willingly of their experience and expertise as well. I am very positive that our audience was able to walk away with some nuggets of knowledge on governance and executive engagement to apply to their organization. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And Suzanne, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.